Karibuni, asanteni. Thank you for being with me today. We are again on our 8th week of our lectures, our political, history, social, and civic education lectures. I am not a teacher by training, but I'm not going to let that stop me from sharing what I have learned and sharing what I continue to learn as I read and analyze while looking at our lives today. So essentially, I'm taking what I'm learning from the books, what our ancestors have told us, what other experts have told us by looking at society and how we interact with each other, and the reasons why some people do well and others don't, and reflecting it on contemporary times and seeing how that information given to us is applied to today's ways. So that the main reason is so that we can figure out solutions to improve our lives as one Ubuntu Africans. Because if we look everywhere, we are the ones on the bottom of the food chain. Apparently, there's a food chain that has been created in humanities circles, and they have ranked us all the way down to the bottom. And it's not just a matter of status that we are on the bottom, is that the resources that contribute to the well-being of a human being are reduced. And I forget, there's a certain show that a friend recently asked me to watch, and I forget the name. It's too bad I forget the name because it would be nice to remember right now. And me talking of that hierarchy in humanity that determines who gets the most resources and who gets the least, and we happen to be on the bottom. God knows who decided. It reminds me of that show. In that show, for those of you who know it, there are levels, there are floors, literal floors, like cement floors. And each floor has a hole, a rectangle hole in the middle. And there's floor, I think it's from floor 1 to floor 177. And so the elite, or this group of people who are not on the floors, are elsewhere watching what's happening on the floors, have decided that this is how things are going to be on these floors. And so they have like an elaborate meal prepared, and there's like a rectangular block table, like that is going to be going in that hole in the middle in each floor. And so the first floor, they get all the food and they get to eat whatever they want, and they have a few seconds to eat, and the table drops to the next floor and drops all the way to the 177th. And on each floor, the people on that floor are eating what the people on the floor before them did not want or did not have time to eat. And on top of that, if the people at the top decided to spit back on the table, they did that. So you're eating that as well. If they decided to literally go help themselves, like release their waste on the table, you ate that too. And they show that in that. So the minute I saw that, I said, I'm not watching this. This is just too real for me. Too real for me. Because I have an understanding of society. The person who wrote the show is on another level mentally, and God help them. But they took our day-to-day lives and put it in a grotesque way. But this is literally what we're doing. We in Africa are eating the piss and the excretion of the West, literally. That is what we are doing. And they have put spit and they have put everything else there. And by the way, the 177th floor, they don't get anything. So by the time the table gets to the 177th floor, there's nothing. And the person in that, there are two people on each floor, there are two people. And so one of the people figures out alternatives of feeding themselves. I will not get into the details. They figure out alternatives of feeding themselves because they keep getting a table that's empty by the time it gets to the 177th floor. And this is what we're doing in Africa. We're taking alternatives of feeding ourselves. We're feeding amongst ourselves. And it's not just on the continent. It is in Black communities everywhere, One Ubuntu communities, in the Black community in the United States, in the projects. We're feeding on ourselves. We're shooting ourselves. We're killing ourselves. We're selling drugs to our people. We're feeding on ourselves in order to survive because we are getting the crumbs. So we need to wake up. We need to wake up because that table at the top floor belongs to us. And guess what? The ingredients they used to cook the food at the top floor came from us. So we need to get a piece of that, and a fresh piece, not leftovers, not crumbs. Anyway, today we are looking at, I hope I didn't lose a page, I just dropped something. Today we are looking at Ha-Joon Chang, and our title today is Neoliberal Capitalism's Failures in Africa. And we're looking at thing 7. As you know, it's 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism, and each chapter is a thing. And we're looking at thing 7 to thing 12. Let me just grab my notes real quick, put them here. And so the lecture explores the failures of neoliberal capitalism in addressing poverty, inequality, and sustainable growth in Africa. In other words, its role in underdeveloping Africa. And so neoliberal capitalism, what is this? Is it different from capitalism? It really isn't different, but it's like capitalism, and then there's stages of capitalism, and this is one of them. And neoliberal capitalism emphasizes free markets, privatization, and minimal government intervention. So this is what the West is selling us. Free markets, they're telling us, okay, Africa, we know better than you because we've been at this. You see, ask the United States, we're a great economy. Ask the British, we're a great economy. The French, we're a great economy. So because we're such a great economy and you guys are shithole countries, we think we're in a better position to tell you how you should go about your business in building your economy. And since we have assumed that position, we're telling you that we believe free markets, privatization of your industries, your government assets and all that, minimal government intervention is the best way to move forward. But Ha-Joon Chang is telling us and exposing the fact that this is a big lie, because even these nations that are telling us to do that did not do that for themselves. That is not how they grew their own economy. And so let's go step by step and see how he reveals this to us. So thing 7, the lie of the free market, right? And I'm going to be reading from the book every now and then as I explain. So the key points: imperialist governments which champion free market ideology for developing nations are hypocritical because their own economies have grown through government regulation and deliberate market creation. So let me go. We are on page 70 for those of you who have the book. If you can get access to the book, if you have funds to purchase the book, buy it. It is 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang. That is H-A. I will put it in the chat. Let me put it in the chat. But for those of you who are listening on audio, when I get the time to post this on Sirius, it's 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capital. This is me, the teacher, writing on the board now, right? But those of you who went to school when we used to have boards and chalk. Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang. He is a Korean gentleman who now lives, I believe, in the UK, but Korean descent. So let's go to page 17. First of all, when we do the things, I like to actually, before we go to page 17, I like to show the way he has it is at the beginning, he has what they tell you. And in my notes, I name it the lie, right? And then he tells you what is actually, what they don't tell you, what is actually the case. So in what they tell you in thing 7, after their independence from colonial rule, this is what the West is telling us, Africans. After their independence from colonial rule, developing countries, that is us, underdeveloped countries, Walter Rodney prefers to call them underdeveloped as opposed to developing, because they're not developing. They're being underdeveloped by someone, an entity, the West, imperialists, foreign entities, China, constantly. So we think we're developing, but we're literally being underdeveloped. And until we wake up and realize that we're being underdeveloped and give up the lie that we are developing, we will not move forward as far as our economy. So when I say developing, in your head, remember Walter Rodney saying that that should be changed to underdeveloped, and that there's someone intentionally underdeveloping us. But Ha-Joon Chang, because part of my critique of the book is that he doesn't consider racism as part of what factors in all these societal issues. And I think racism is a big part of it. And so, because he's not looking at racism, he grew up in a different area where he didn't have to worry about it as much. He may be from Korea, but he's also South Korea to be specific, but he's also from just understanding what he does, he's part of the elite. So he may not have understood the plight of the South Koreans who are not as wealthy as he is. So every time I say developing, it is underdeveloped. So after their independence from colonial rule, developing countries tried to develop their economies through state intervention, sometimes even explicitly adopting socialism. They tried to develop industries such as steel and automobiles, which were beyond their capabilities, artificially by using measures such as trade protectionism, a ban on foreign direct investment, industrial subsidies, and even state ownership of banks and industrial enterprises. At an emotional level, this is what they give us. At an emotional level, this was understandable, given that their former colonial masters were all capitalist countries pursuing free market policies. However, this strategy produced at best stagnation and at worst disaster. Growth was anemic, if not negative, and the protected industries failed to grow up. Thankfully, most of these countries have come to their senses since the 1980s and come to adopt free market policies. When you think about it, this was the right thing to do from the beginning. All of today's rich countries, with the exception of Japan and possibly Korea, although there is debate on that, have become rich through free market policies. Big lie. Especially through free trade with the rest of the world. And developing countries that have more fully embraced such policies have done better in the recent period. That is the big lie they've been telling us. Ha-Joon Chang continued to say, what they don't really tell you is that, contrary to what is commonly believed, the performance of developing countries in the period of state-led development was superior to what they have achieved during the subsequent period of market-oriented reform. In The Struggle Continues, I believe it is, Nkrumah's book, The Struggle Continues, he shows how he grew Ghana's economy in the first 10 years of his presidency. And a lot of Nsi Ubuntu African nations after colonialism, before the interference of the United States, because at that time is when they're exchanging hands, right? It is after World War II, 1945. World War II is ending. The Bretton Woods gathering in 44, as they're wrapping up, they're all in debt. The Europe, that is, they're in debt. The nations, the UK is in debt, France is in debt, and all those nations, Germany is in debt. And therefore, they come to the US to help them out, and the US comes with conditions in order for us to bail you out, because the US at that time has built their economy because they were literally supporting the war. They were building their weapons for the war. They were providing all the services for the war at that time, and therefore they built their economy, manufacturing for the war. Their industrialization starts at that time when they were manufacturing. And therefore they're wealthy, and they bail out Europe after the World War II. But they come with conditions. If we're going to bail you out, then you're going to hand over your colonial nations to us. We're going to call the shots back in Africa. We're going to control how the access to resources and everything else. And so before this takes off completely, before this actually has, and before they introduce the free market theory in the 80s, African nations have a small period after independence to actually have some sense of sovereignty. It is not full sovereignty, but some sense of sovereignty as far as their economy, building the economy. And Ghana, for example, Nkrumah does a great job in industrializing, manufacturing the first 10 years of his leadership before the coup that was led by the CIA against him, and he's taken out of office. So I continue reading, there were some spectacular failures of state intervention, but most of these countries grew much faster, with more equitable income distribution and far fewer financial crises during the bad old days than they have done in the period of market-oriented reforms. Moreover, it is also not true that almost all rich countries have become rich through free market policies. The truth is more or less the opposite. With only a few exceptions, all of today's rich countries, including Britain and the US, the supposed homes of free trade and free market, have become rich through combinations of protectionism, subsidies, and other policies that today they advise the developing countries not to adopt. Free market policies have made few countries rich so far and will make few rich in the future. So Ha-Joon Chang is helping us just expose that big lie that free market is the solution. But those of us who reside within the borders of the United States, we've witnessed that the United States is actually not a capitalist nation. It is both a capitalist and a socialist nation. Why do I say that? In healthcare, you have Medicaid, you have Medicare. So if you are not able to afford healthcare, and by the way, the criteria to qualify is really high. So this is not a guarantee that you'll be covered by Medicaid. For example, in my case, I have not been employed since last year, and I applied for health insurance. Medicaid is for young people. Medicare is for the older generation. So 60, I believe, and above, or 58. I'm not sure. I might be wrong on the age. But Medicaid, in order to qualify, I'm still waiting for mine to be approved. And I've been waiting months for it to be approved, right? So it's not a guarantee that you'll get in. But this essentially is the state paying for your health coverage. And you don't have to pay the expensive health coverage that you do when you're employed, you're in the private sector and all that. So now you're there's a certain requirement as far as income. You have to be literally really, really poor to qualify for state assistance. But it's there. So that's the socialist end of the United States economy. When the car industry was falling apart, the United States bailed the car companies out. When the insurance industry was falling apart, the financial industry, the United States bailed those organizations out. They funded them. They gave them subsidies. Farmers, they give them subsidies. So the United States, as much as it tells us not to follow these socialist, right, practices, they are a capitalist and socialist economy. They're not just a capitalist economy. So he continues, and I'm going to be using mostly the book because from the book is where we're going to get examples. This one is like part of decolonizing our minds. Unfortunately, I'm going to be very honest with you all. Those of you who don't know, those of you who are just starting your journey, those of you who've begun, it's very frustrating. You will be frustrated, even to the point of depression, because you're getting a clear view of how things run, but you don't have the resources and the capability to do much about it yet. And therefore, you're climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and you don't have the equipment to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And it is frustrating. And you cannot turn back because you're not going to be subjugated for the rest of your lives. You have to keep climbing despite how frustrating it is. This is the price of knowing. But we must know ignorance is not bliss, because either way, you're not saved from from experiencing the plight. On page 66, there's an example given, and I want to read this one all the way, because I need to expose. This is exposing the United States that claims that free market is the way. Alexander Hamilton, for those of you who know American history, he was the first Treasury Secretary, not a president, but he is on the $10 bill. The $10 bill, they have faces of presidents, but not just presidents, founding fathers as well. Founding fathers, they call them, United States founding fathers. So Alexander Hamilton is one of them, was the Treasury Secretary at that time. Hamilton is on the $10 bill because, unbeknown to most Americans today, he is the architect of the modern American economic system. 2 years after becoming Treasury Secretary in 1789, at the outrageously young age of 33, Hamilton submitted to the Congress the Report on the Subject of Manufactures, where he set out the economic development strategy for his young country. In the report, he argued that industries in their infancy, at the beginning, like the American ones, need to be protected and nurtured by government before they can stand on their own feet. Hamilton's report was not just about trade protectionism. He also argued for public investment in infrastructure such as canals, development of the banking system, promotion of a government bond market, but protectionism was at the heart of his strategy. Given his views, were Hamilton finance minister of a developing country today, he would have been heavily criticized by the U.S. Treasury Department for his heresy. His country might even have been refused a loan from the IMF and the World Bank. So these are the penalties African nations face when they try to stand away from this system, the free market. The interesting thing, however, is that Hamilton was not alone in this. All the other dead presidents would have met the same disapproval from the US Treasury, the IMF, the World Bank, and other defenders of the free market faith today. On the $1 bill is the first president, George Washington. At his inauguration ceremony, he insisted on wearing American clothes, specially woven in Connecticut for the occasion, rather than higher quality British ones. Today, this would have been a violation of the proposed World Trade Organization rule on transparency in government procurement. You remember when Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, I believe, wanted to get rid of the second-hand clothing industry and revive the textile industry in that area. This is what happened to them. They were threatened sanctions because they were accused of breaking the rule, violating the rule on transparency in government procurement under the free market agreement. Let's not forget Washington was the one who appointed Hamilton as Treasury Secretary. And in full knowledge of what his view on economic policy was, Hamilton was Washington's aide-de-camp during the American War of Independence and his closest political ally after that. On the $5 bill, we have Abraham Lincoln, a well-known protectionist who during the Civil War raised tariffs to their highest level ever. On the $50 bill, we have Ulysses Grant, the Civil War hero turned president. In defiance of the British pressure on the USA to adopt free trade, he once remarked that within 200 years, when America has gotten out of protection, all that it can offer, it too will adopt free trade. So he said, chill, Britain. Okay, we hear you, but for now we're going to protect ourselves. Maybe in 200 years we'll adopt your free trade. And they had the freedom to do that. Benjamin Franklin did not share Hamilton's infant industry doctrine, but he insisted on high tariff protection for another reason. At the time, the existence of almost free land in the, you like how these white people change the narrative and whitewash it. Almost free land, stolen land, the existence of stolen land in the US made it necessary for American manufacturers to offer wages around 4 times higher than the European average, as otherwise the workers would have run away to set up farms. So they protected their workers. They subsidized in order to protect their workers from leaving the industries, the manufacturing industry. This was no idle threat by the farmers that they would go back to the farms, given that many of them were farmers in their previous lives. Therefore, Franklin argued the American manufacturers could not survive unless they were protected from low-wage competition, or what is known as social dumping. They call it that today from Europe. This is exactly the logic that Ross Perot, the billionaire-turned-politician, used in order to oppose NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, in the 1992 presidential election campaign, a logic that 18.9% of the American voters were happy to endorse. So he's showing us that despite the fact that the US is telling us, take free trade, Africa, this is where you are, you're not developed, take free trade. They themselves, when they were not developed, decided to take on protectionist and government had control of industry and support, not control necessarily, support of industry and uplifted industry so that they could grow through government funding. And so we as Africans need to turn around and say to the US, hey, when you were just a baby nation starting in industry and manufacturing and economy building, basically structuring your governance, the beginning of your governance, you chose to have protectionism. You chose to have government influence in industry and economics in order to grow your economy. And your economy is where it is now because of that, not because of a free trade market. Now, yes, the free market, yes, because they're stealing from Africa. And we'll see how eventually in our course. But back then, and even today, your government has held up your industries. Your government has held up your economy. So you know what, United States, sit back, relax. We're gonna, just like who is it? Ulysses Grant. Just like Ulysses Grant told Britain, chill, give us 200 years, we will reconsider. Africans should tell the United States, Britain, and any other entity that is forcing them to take over the free trade, we don't care about your sanctions, sanction us. But in 200 years, we can have this conversation. We're going to do this and that for our economies. So again, free market is not free for Africans, and we should abandon this lie. And I like that Ha-Joon Chang, I have Hamilton stuck in my head, is exposing how he explains that the US economy was built on protectionist policies and government intervention, a stark contrast to the free market ideology the US now promotes to developing nations. Give me a minute. So Chang's broader argument is that developing countries today, like those in Africa, are denied the very tools that the US and other rich nations use to become wealthy. These free market policies harm industrial development in these countries, locking them into a state of underdevelopment and dependency on wealthier nations, which is what the wealthy nations want. The irony is that while African countries are told to rely on market forces, the US and other imperial powers built their economies through active government support and protectionism. So we must start calling them out and saying no to this. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all. Good to see you all there. So what does the free market, us believing in this lie of free market, what is it doing to us African nations? It's creating poverty and inequality. You have a very wealthy elite, few elite, and then a majority of people are poor. Stark difference, right? Where you have some people in Congo, for example, making millions a day because they're involved with the criminals. They have ties with the criminals that are ripping Congo of its resources. And then you have the regular Congolese people, $2 a day. $2 a day. So this is caused by us believing in the lie of free market policies and not developing our own economies. What else? Economic dependency and vulnerability. So if your economy is dependent on powers that do not seek to develop you, on powers that seek to underdevelop you, you're going to be vulnerable. And we are currently, the African nations are vulnerable. They're vulnerable militarily. They're vulnerable economic-wise. They're vulnerable, their health. Our food industry, food security is vulnerable today because we have allowed multinational organizations to have a more voice than, and if I have time, like 5 minutes towards the end, I'm going to give you some of these organizations' names, or maybe at a different, on a different lecture. I was doing some research, and with the help of ChatGPT, by the way, doing some research on organizations that are essentially non-profit, by the way, and for-profit organizations on the continent that tell us they're doing one thing, while in the back end, they're actually promoting US imperialism. So, and they're the ones who we are vulnerable to, right? They're the ones who are going to take advantage of this vulnerability. So free markets make African economies reliant on raw material exports. So we are told, okay, we think that we are building our economies on exporting raw materials, but we export them at very cheap because we don't determine the prices. And then they go manufacture them and sell them back to us as complete manufactured goods at very high costs. So this creates vulnerability to global price fluctuations, like I just explained. Environmental degradation, and this one is one that really makes me angry. Free markets allow unsustainable resource extraction. Now you're dependent on raw material exports, so you increase your resource extraction by multinational corporations, and it's unsustainable because it is destroying your ecosystem. So, for example, the oil extraction in Nigeria's Niger Delta. And I'm going to just pull my notes there because I wanted to focus on this one, the Niger Delta, and what oil drilling of oil has done there. So you've had oil spills, right? Due to poor infrastructure, negligence, and occasional sabotage, oil pipelines frequently ruptured. They've ruptured there. And what this has done is that it's destroyed the soil. So the oil seeps into the soil, rendering farmlands unusable and reducing agricultural productivity. So now they cannot even farm on those soils, right? The oil seeps into the water bodies, and we've seen in that Niger Delta area, they used to have a great ecosystem of fish, right? They had an abundance of fish, but because of the oil spills in that area, they no longer have fish in that area. So a community that had a great source of protein no longer has a great source of protein. So food security is compromised in the Niger Delta because they allowed these companies to come and tell them, oh, we need free markets, right? They bought into the free market lie. You have gas flaring in those areas, like there's always fires going up in those areas, which result in air pollution, global warming through the air pollution, right? And they'll sit back, and when they analyze your contribution towards global warming, they will blame you, Nigeria, and not themselves, who caused the problems of these gas flares that are causing these toxic gases. And so the destruction of the ecosystem and biodiversity happens, and this has a great impact on human health. In that area, you have waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery. You have health complications from the pollution, high cases of cancer in that area, respiratory diseases and birth defects in that area. And then all in all, the economic devastation, which is a cycle of underdevelopment. This is what free market has done to the Niger Delta area because they bought the lie. All right, we're going to move up to thing 8, capital as nationality, right? They tell us that the myth that multinational corporations are stateless entities is false. That's what Ha-Joon Chang is telling us. They are deeply tied to their home countries and work for the benefit of their national economies. So despite the rhetoric of globalization, these corporations seek to exploit resources in developing nations like Africa while funneling wealth back to their home countries. And as we were looking at the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I want to let you all know that we're going to have John Parkins on our collaborative session this Sunday with the Imaginal Kelbulan, and we're going to deep into the confessions that he has given in the book. And so he shows us how their role was essentially to secure these multinational companies by getting them deals in Africa and elsewhere where countries are underdeveloped and subjugated by the United States, especially. For the sole purpose of them generating wealth from those areas, just sucking. Think of a tool that is just sucking, and funneling it back to their countries and growing their own wealth. So African nations are pressured to open their markets to global capital, but in reality, these multinationals benefit the economies of their imperialist home countries, not the African people. So the billions that they're making, they don't even invest in Africa. And this is worse, not only because they're generating income, but also they're not being taxed in these African nations where they are. They're not being taxed. So I'll read a couple of paragraphs. So like I said, I always like to do the what they tell you and what they don't tell you, what is actually real. So that I'll be reading that in everything. So what they tell you, the real hero of globalization has been the transnational corporation. Transnational corporations, as their name implies, are corporations that have gone beyond their original, my goodness, it's already 10:34, national boundaries. They may be still headquartered in the country where they were founded, but much of their production and research facilities are outside their home country, employing people, including many top decision makers from across the world. In this age of such nationless capital, nationalistic policies towards foreign capital are at best ineffective and at worst counterproductive. If a country's government discriminates against them, transnational corporations will not invest in that country. The intention may be, and you hear a lot of Africans repeating this lie, oh, if we say they can't operate, they will not operate, and how will we grow our economy? Who cares? The intention may be to help the national economy by promoting national farms, but such policies actually harm it by preventing the most efficient farms from establishing themselves in the country. This is the big lie that they tell us. What is actually the case? Ha-Joon Chang tells us. Despite the increasing transnationalization of capital, most transnational companies, in fact, remain national companies with international operations rather than genuinely nationless companies. For those of you with a different tongue, nation is what I'm saying, nation. They conduct the bulk of their core activities, such as high-end research and strategizing, at home. Most of their top decision makers are home country nationals. Bill Gates will come and go all over the Africa, right? In acting like he can survive there. I saw him on a farm the other day with his gumboots, as if he knows even how to put a seed in the soil. Looking like one of you, and all of you clapping for him, like the mentally colonized people that you are, the zombies that you are, clapping for him as he walks on stage. But no. He's going to catch a flight and go back home and sip his whatever he sips and smoke his cigar if he does smoke it, or just chill counting his dollars that he has funneled back to his nation while he's underdeveloping you. Most of their top decision makers are home country nationals. When they have to shut down factories or cut jobs, they usually do it last at home for various political and, more importantly, economic reasons. This means that the home country appropriates the bulk of the benefits from a transnational corporation. Of course, their nationality is not the only thing that determines how corporations behave. In this chapter, he gives the example of how one of the reasons why these transnational nations cannot detach from the nation is because the nation is actually subsidizing them. They are dependent on the nation's funding to exist. In case the economy falls, they go back to the nation for help. So they are tied to the nation in that way. They cannot actually abandon the nation. And so for you Africans to think that they're multinational or they're there for us is a false errand. Thing 9, we do not live in a post-industrial age. So the lie is that they're telling us that developing nations should skip underdeveloped nations should skip industrialization and move straight. I might not read all of it because we're running out of time, and move straight into the service industry. But this is harmful to long-term economic growth, right? We cannot rely on service industry. Let me actually look. Service industries offer limited productivity growth and poor export potential, which reduces their ability to earn foreign exchange and purchase advanced technologies. Today, the dollar's value is determined by the goods they manufacture. And then they turn around and tell us that we are supposed to build a service industry. And our currencies continue to be undervalued because they're not telling us that when we start producing goods, that our currencies will gain value, because that is what currently determines the value of a currency. So again, let's stop falling for the lie. Let me see quickly if I had a couple of pages that I wanted to read from here, because sometimes it's nice to just let the person who's done the research tell you about it. All right, so I'm not going to read the whole lie and the whole truth. I'll read part of it. So the lie is that manufacturing industry, once the driving force of capitalism, is not important anymore, with a natural tendency for the relative demand for services to rise with prosperity, and with the rise of high productivity, knowledge-based services such as banking and management consulting. Today, they tell you about STEM, right? Internet and everything related to internet. Manufacturing technology, right? Manufacturing industries have gone into decline in all rich countries. This is the lie. These countries have entered the post-industrial age, where most people work in services and most outputs are services. The decline of manufacturing is not only something natural that we needn't worry about, but something that we should really celebrate. This is the lie they tell us. With the rise of knowledge-based services, it may be better even for some developing countries to skip those doomed manufacturing activities altogether and leapfrog straight to a service-based post-industrial economy. And you're seeing this lie driven by the so-called leaders of African nations. All right, the truth. The idea that developing countries can largely skip industrialization and enter the post-industrial phase directly is a fantasy. Their limited scope for productivity growth makes services a poor engine of growth. The low tradability of services means that a more service-based economy will have a lower ability to export. There you go. Lower export earnings And we're talking about finished goods, not raw materials. Lower export earnings means a weaker ability to buy advanced technologies from abroad because your currency is undervalued, which in turn leads to a slower growth. So there goes that one. Thing 10, the US does not have the highest living standard in the world. This is what Ha-Joon Chang is telling us. Unlike the lie that we have all believed, including myself, including my parents when they sent me here, it, it is true and it isn't true, right? The US does not have the highest living standard. And this one I am actually going to definitely read from the book In the World. Although the US is often touted as the model for a successful free market system, its high inequality distorts the idea that it has the highest living standard. Many Americans work longer hours for fewer benefits, and the country suffers from poorer health indicators and worse crime rates compared to other wealthy nations. Actually, in some research, the US has been declared or determined the worst society as far as the well-being of human beings in the world. The worst. And we will see why that is the case. So, I actually did have a specific click. Yeah, okay. This is page 108, Think 10. Given that the US has by far the most unequal distribution of income among the rich countries, we can safely guess that the US per capita income overstates the actual living standards of more of its citizens than in other countries. And this conjecture is indirectly supported by other indicators of living standards. For example, despite having the highest average PPP income, the US ranks only around 30th in the world in health statistics such as life expectancy. I think it's per capita per person or something, PPP. Someone please look it up quickly what PPP stands for so that we inform fully. We're not giving people acronyms. Goodness, let me quickly just grab that. I should have done that beforehand. No, it's not the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm certain it's not the Paycheck Protection Program. All right, we'll figure that one out. We have our discussions on Monday on Twitter Space. I'll get that answer for you all then. So, for example, despite having the highest average PPP income, the US ranks only around 30th in the world in health statistics such as life expectancy and infant mortality. Okay, the inefficiency of the US healthcare system contributes to this. But let's not get into that. The much higher crime rate than in Europe or Japan in per capita terms, the US has 8 times more people in prison than Europe and 12 times more than Japan. Shows that there is a far bigger underclass in the US. And by the way, that little paragraph right there is part of the reason I criticize Ha-Joon Chang for not factoring race. The number of people in US prisons is not just high or the highest in the world just because of increased crime. It is also the highest in the world because of the US having criminalizing laws that criminalize Black people mostly, African people, wana Ubuntu, and they are the most people in these prisons. So it is not that the Black people are criminal. It is that like the activity, it is that the activities that they do, that white people do too, are criminalized at a much more drastic rate than they are for white people. And therefore, you have many, many Black people in US prisons. So it's not just the increased crime, but let's stick with Ha-Joon Chang. Second, the fact that its PPP income is more or less the same as its market exchange rate income is proof that the higher average living standard in the US is built on the poverty of many, and many beyond the United States borders. What do I mean by this? As I have pointed out earlier, it is normal for a rich country's PPP income to be lower, sometimes significantly, than its market exchange rate income, because it has expensive service workers. However, this does not happen to the US because, unlike other rich countries, it has cheap service workers. To begin with, there is a large inflow of low-wage immigrants from poor countries, many of them illegal, which makes them even cheaper. Moreover, even the native workers have much weaker fallback positions in the US than in European countries of comparable income level. Because they have, you can work at Burger King, because they have much less job security and weaker welfare support. US workers, especially the non-unionized ones in the service industries, work for lower wages and under inferior conditions than do their European counterparts. So those Americans who are out here complaining about immigrants, talking about, oh, Joe Biden this, Joe Biden that, Kamala Harris, and by the way, me pointing this out does not mean I support Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or the D word, Democrats. No. Whether it is Republicans or Democrats, the multinationals rule governance in the United States. And according to them, immigrants are good for the United States economy. So no matter how much you fight, whether you put Trump in there, the multinationals will knock on Trump's door and say, yo, 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 what the hell do you think? We need the immigrants. This is why things like taxi rides and meals at restaurants are so much cheaper in the US than in other rich countries. This is great when you are the customer, the US people, but not if you are the taxi driver and the waitress. In other words, the higher purchasing power of average US income is bought at the price of lower income and inferior working conditions for many US citizens. And most of the people in that area are brown people like you and I. Last but not least, in comparing living standards across countries, we should not ignore the differences in working hours. Even if someone is earning, and immigrants, especially those from Africa, you know this life, actually all immigrants. You have to work 3 jobs all day, sleep 3 hours to make ends meet. This is building America's, United States economy. We should not ignore the differences in working hours. Even if someone is earning 50% more money than I earn, you wouldn't say that he has a higher living standard than I do if that person has to work double the number of hours that I do. The same applies to the US. The Americans, befitting their reputation for workaholism, work longer hours than the citizens of any other country that has a per capita income of more than $30,000 at market exchange rate in 2007. Greece being the poorest of the lot at just under $30,000 per capita income. Americans work 10% longer than most Europeans and around 30% longer than the Dutch and the Norwegians. According to a calculation by the Icelandic economist Thorvaldur Gifalson, I'm not even going to try, in terms of income, in PPP terms, per hour worked in 2005, the US ranked only 8th after Luxembourg, Norway, France. Yes, France, that nation of loungers. Ireland, Belgium, Austria, and the Netherlands, and was very closely followed by Germany. In other words, per unit of effort, the Americans are not getting as high a living standard as their counterparts in competitor nations. They make up for this lower productivity through much longer hours. So that's what I was saying, by the way, when I was saying before. The United States of America has the worst living standards in the world. The worst. For the majority. We're not talking about the ones in the Maseratis that you see in New York driving around the streets. We're not talking about those Africans who are now hired as models in New York and who post all kinds of luxurious videos. No, that's not who we're talking about. We're not talking about the people who are getting in jets and going to Dubai and all that. That's not the American we're talking about. We're talking about the majority. Because that American, by the way, exists in Africa, driving the Maserati and Range Rovers in Africa. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the elite few. That is not what we're going to continue moving forward judging economy by. We're going to actually give up this nonsense of GDP that takes one rich person and increases your GDP. And we're actually going to go back to looking at Ubuntu. How is everyone living? Is my well-being contributing to the well-being of others, or is my well-being exploiting others? And if my well-being is exploiting others, I need to check myself. And I need to adjust to make sure that my well-being is contributing to the well-being of ours as opposed to exploiting. This is the lesson on that page. So despite the big lie that the US has a high living standard and the US is the mecca of all well-being, it ain't. Thing 11, Africa is not destined for underdevelopment. So they tell us the widespread imperialist narrative is that Africa is doomed to, this one I actually have to read, because as I was reading it, I got so pissed off. I did get mad. And it's okay to get mad. John Perkins, who's coming on Sunday, has told us we have to be outraged. We have to be outraged and do whatever it takes to transform, after we had our session with Dr. Jackson. Not change, transform from a death economy to a life-giving economy. So thing 11, right? Africa is not destined for underdevelopment. They tell us this part. In my notes, I said, this is the most aggravating lie because the imperialists do not tell the truth about their role in causing these characteristics of Africa. Exclamation mark. That is my note right there. So the lie. Africa is destined for underdevelopment. It has a poor climate, which leads to serious tropical disease problems. It has lousy geography, with many of its countries landlocked and surrounded by countries whose small, my goodness, it's 1050, whose small markets offer limited export opportunities and whose violent, you know what? I'm going to go over for today's lesson. I am going to go over because guess what? I can determine for self. I'm going to go over. It has too many natural resources, which make its people lazy. This line right here. Let me start. Africa is destined for underdevelopment. It has a poor climate, which leads to serious tropical disease problems. It has lousy geography, with many of its countries landlocked and surrounded by countries whose small markets offer limited export opportunities and whose violent conflicts spill into neighboring countries. It has too many natural resources, which make its people lazy, corrupt, and conflict-prone. African nations are ethnically divided, which renders them difficult to manage, more likely to experience violent conflicts. More likely to experience violent conflicts. They have poor quality institutions that do not protect investors well. Their culture is bad. People do not work hard. They do not save and they cannot cooperate with each other. All these structural handicaps explain why, unlike other regions of the world, the continent has failed to grow even after it has implemented significant market liberalization since the 1980s, the free market lie. There is no other way forward for Africa than being propped up by foreign aid. Let that sink in. Please take a minute and let that sink in. These people who are coming to our nations giving us hope have actually determined that there is no other way forward for Africa than being propped up by foreign aid. So why the hell you as an African is in a room listening to a white man, white woman telling you to do shit is beyond my understanding and beyond my tolerance. I am not giving you grace anymore. To hell with grace. I am calling you out as being the reason why we are still underdeveloped. You African that is clapping for Bill Gates as he walks in. Enough with grace. It is time, honestly, it is time to shame people into waking up. Again, we talk about tough love, and we joke about it. Tough love is the way to go, tough love. It is time for tough love for Africans. Enough with grace and pussyfooting about things that are affecting our lives, things that are causing death to Africans. Enough of it. So these people are saying to us, there is no other way forward for Africa than being propped up by foreign nations. That because we have so many natural resources, that makes us lazy, corrupt, and conflict prone. Like these people are not sending economic hitmen and their jackals, CIA, to cause these conflicts. This part pissed me off. It outraged me. And I wanted to outrage you. I wanted to piss you off. To piss you off to the point where you do something. Please, before it's too late. That's the lie. The truth, Ha-Joon Chang is telling us. Africa has not always been stagnant. In the 1960s and 70s, when all the supposed structural impediments to growth were present and often more binding, it actually posted a decent growth performance. Moreover, all the structural handicaps that are supposed to hold back Africa have been present in most of today's rich countries. Poor climate, Arctic and tropical, landlockedness, abundant natural resources, ethnic divisions, poor institutions, and bad culture. These come to the States and see how they have tribalism. Come to the States and see how there's ethnic division in the United States. It may not seem like so because it is Wazungu versus Wazungu, but there is 100%. And wait until we cross from Wazungu to brown people. It does exist. These structural conditions seem to act as impediments to development in Africa only because its countries do not yet have the necessary technologies, institutions, and organization skills to deal with their adverse consequences. Why? Because we've been stopped by the lie of free market. We've been told we can't create them and accepting policies that stop us from creating that. The real cause of African stagnation, this is the part that I highlighted, but I read the whole truth. The real cause of African stagnation in the last 3 decades is free market policies that the continent has been forced to implement during the period. Unlike history or geography, policies can be changed. Policies must be changed. Africa is not destined for underdevelopment. And I say there in my notes, if the IMF and World Bank and other private entities who promote these policies are removed from the equation, Africa will develop. And I'm glad I decided to go over because I will read the list of these private entities. That is thing 11. So in this area, like I said, I critique Chang because I say he doesn't address the racist stereotypes that paint Africans as unworthy of self-governance used to justify exploitation of Africa's resources by imperial powers. If nowhere else, Ha-Joon Chang, and it is time that you actually do another version of the book and include racism and go study it so that you can include racism, so that you can give us a full picture, a true and authentic, accurate picture of the 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism, because race is one of them. Racism is 100% one of them. And I'm actually kind of mad at you that you didn't include it. Like, what the? Right? So, these stereotypes that I read just now, you know very well come from back in the day when they decided to enslave us, when they decided to call us inferior and animals and not human so that they could exploit us. And that must be accounted in any analysis anyone does of the economy and capitalism and where we are today as a society. Thing 12, governments can pick winners. That's what he says. This lie of the government cannot pick winners, the government cannot be involved in business, is a big fat lie. The lie: governments do not have the necessary information and expertise to make informed business decisions and pick winners through industrial policy. If anything, government decision makers are likely to pick some spectacular losers, given that they are motivated by power rather than profit, and that they do not have to bear the financial consequences of their decisions. Like, sometimes the stupidity in the lies, like, you have to sit and critically be vigilant as you read these books and as you listen to white people talk, because these lies that are being exposed by Ha-Joon Chang are the ones that they're giving you in their speeches when they come to Africa. These lies is what Bill Gates basically repeats all the time. So while he's repeating them, sit there, critically analyze, write down the notes, and when he stops talking, say to him, Bill Gates, you're full of shit because blah, 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 blah. And awaken the other Africans in the room who are swallowing the Kool-Aid as Bill Gates dishes it out to them. If anything, government decision makers are likely to pick some spectacular losers, given that they are motivated by power rather than profit, and that they do not have to bear the financial consequences of their decisions. Are we serious right now? That government will not bear the financial consequences of an economy falling apart? Especially if government tries to go against market logic and promote industries that go beyond a country's given resources and competences, the results are disastrous, as proven by the white elephant projects that litter developing countries. And they've made this lie seem true in Africa because they prop up the government, they prop up politicians, they give them finances. So no matter how bad the economy is in Africa, they're feeding them with finances. So it seems like they're never affected by the economy going bad. That's what it seems like. Again, we're using the word it seems like. What the truth is, governments can pick winners, sometimes spectacularly well. When we look around with an open mind, there are many examples of successful winner picking by governments from all over the world. The argument that government decisions affecting business firms are bound to be inferior to the decisions made by the firms themselves is unwarranted. Having more detailed information does not guarantee better decisions. It may actually be more difficult to make the right decision if one is in the thick of it. Also, there are ways for the government to acquire better information and improve the quality of its decisions. Moreover, decisions that are good for individual firms may not be good for the nation economy as a whole. Therefore, the government picking winners against market signals can improve national economic performance, especially if it is done in close but not too close collaboration with the private sector. And as seen in the case of the United States and Alexander Hamilton and them, that is literally what they did to build their economy. I'm going to read page 132 to 133. Actually, to 134. And then we can go to solutions. But before we go to solutions, let me actually find where I saved it. I'm going to get these thieves, these companies, so that you know them. I'm going to name them by name so that you know them. I have to remember where I put them. Yeah, there we go. All right, I think this is the list here. Bear with me, I am still here. Nope, that's not the list. This is the list I want to read. Okay, so page 132 to 134. And then we're going to go to these organizations. So if governments, it's down on the bottom, if governments can and do pick winners with such regularity, sometimes with spectacular results, you may wonder whether there is something wrong with the dominant economic theory that says that it cannot be done. Yes, I would say that there are many things wrong with the theory. First of all, the theory implicitly assumes that those who are closest to the situation will have the best information and thus make the best decision. This may sound plausible, but if proximity to the situation guaranteed a better decision, no business would ever make a wrong decision. Sometimes being too close to the situation can actually make it more, rather than less, difficult to see the situation objectively. This is why there are so many business decisions that the decision makers themselves believe to be works of genius that others view with skepticism, if not downright contempt. For example, in 2000, AOL, the internet company, acquired Time Warner Media Group. Despite the deep skepticism of many outsiders, Steve Case, AOL's then chairman, called it a historic merger that would transform the landscape of media and the internet. Subsequently, the merger turned out to be a spectacular failure, prompting Jerry Levin, the Time Warner chief at the time of the merger, to admit in January 2010 that it was the worst deal of the century. Of course, by saying that we cannot necessarily assume a government's decision concerning a firm will be worse than a decision by the firm itself. I'm not denying the importance of having good information. However, insofar as such information is needed for its industrial policy, the government can make sure that it has such information. And indeed, the governments that have been more successful at picking winners tend to have more effective channels of information exchange with the business sector. One obvious way for a government to ensure that it has good business information is to set up an SOE, a state-owned enterprise, and run the business itself. Countries such as Singapore, France, Austria, Norway, and Finland relied heavily some of the biggest economies. Those of you, I go to Kenyan spaces and always talking about Singapore, heavily on this solution. Second, a government can legally require that firms in industries that receive state support regularly report on some key aspects of their businesses. So every corporation in Kenya must be reporting to the Kenyan government what they're doing with their business. The Korean government did this very thoroughly in the 1970s. By the way, Nkrumah did this when he took office. The Korean government did this very thoroughly in the 1970s when it was providing a lot of financial support for several new industries such as shipbuilding, steel, and electronics. Yet another method is to rely on informal networks between government officials and business elites so that the officials develop a good understanding of business situation. You have to be careful with that one. Although an exclusive reliance on this channel can lead to excessive clubbiness or downright corruption, which is how it's operating in Africa. The French policy network, built around the graduates of ENA, École Nationale d'Administration, is the most famous example of this, showing both its positive and negative sides. Somewhere in between the two extremes of legal requirement and personal networks, the Japanese have developed the deliberation councils. They have a council, deliberation councils, where government officials and business leaders regularly exchange information through formal channels in the presence of third-party observers from academia and the media. I say even the regular Monanchi should be in those rooms. Moreover, dominant economic theory fails to recognize that there could be a clash between business interests and national interests. Even though businessmen may generally, but not necessarily, as I argued above, know their own affairs better than government officials and therefore be able to make decisions that best serve their company's interests, there is no guarantee that their decisions are going to be good for the national economy. So, for example, when it wanted to enter the textile industry in the 1960s, the managers of LG were doing the right thing for their company. But in pushing them to enter the electric cable industry, which enabled LG to become an electronics company, the Korean government was serving Korea's national interest and LG's interest in the long run better. In other words, the government picking winners may hurt some business interest, but it may produce a better outcome from a social point of view. From a social point of view, which means the majority of the people will be served better. The elites might not have the luxurious, cushy situation they have, but the majority of people will have a good living standard. And that's what we want. So my solution is communalism. Going back to communalism. And communalism does not mean that you give up your wealth and all that. It just means that you ensure that instead of accumulating wealth and wealth and wealth and wealth, you distribute it to those who don't have any. And for you to come to me on the phone, because this has happened, Kenyans and non-Kenyans coming to me on the phone and telling me, why should we share with people who are not working hard? You will tell me right now that the people in the village are not working hard and actually go and show me that person in the village that's not working hard. You will actually have to, and you're going to pay the bus fare, and you're going to buy me food when we go to the village for you to show me. You will take care of my expenses, but you will take me to that village and show me that person that you're calling lazy, that doesn't work hard, that deserves to be poor. I want to see them with my two eyes. Because the truth is they are working very hard day to day. You see them kids running up and down those mines in Congo, the adults. And you want to tell me that they earn $2 because they don't work hard, because they're lazy? Congo has all kinds of resources. They wake up every day looking at resources moving out of their nation, and they're lazy? Because they have resources, they're lazy and prone to corruption and prone to conflict, despite the fact that they're not causing the conflict, that Rwanda, Kagame is sending troops there, and mercenaries to cause conflict. So you want to say that the Congolese who wakes up and sees the resources is the reason why they have conflict? Come on now, y'all. We need to stop this. So here are these companies, before we go to solutions, right? Here are these companies that I pulled up. The Human Rights Watch. The Human Rights Watch is one of the most prominent human rights organizations, right, globally, based in the United States with extensive operations across Africa. It focuses on documenting human rights abuses, advocating for policy changes, and holding governments accountable. Their Western backing. The Human Rights Watch receives significant funding from wealthy donors, including George Soros's Open Society Foundations. It has been criticized for selective reporting and bias, often focusing on human rights abuses in countries that oppose Western geopolitical interests, while downplaying or ignoring abuses in US-aligned countries. These are NGOs. I wanted to go to the NGOs first, because they're the ones lying to you the most. And they're the ones you've been duped by because you think they're there to help you. Because they told us, our only hope in Africa is foreign aid. So let me go to the NGOs and tell you what they're actually doing. They're not aiding you. Human Rights Watch has been accused of promoting Western agendas by undermining governments and movements in Africa that resist neoliberal economic policies or Western intervention. So this conflict that you claim Africans are prone to because they are looking at resources and they just don't know what to do with themselves with all these resources, but to be lazy and prone to conflict is being caused by someone like Human Rights Watch. Through its reports, Human Rights Watch, this is the vulnerability, this is what makes Africa vulnerability. Human Rights Watch can influence international policy, encouraging sanctions, interventions, or regime change against African governments that refuse to comply with Western economic or political demands. This is what the Human Rights Watch is actually there to do, not aid you. Amnesty International. Amnesty International is a global human rights organization that operates in various African countries. It focuses on issues like freedom of expression, prison conditions, and government accountability. You know, it's laughable when you hear these people. I used to work with the government. I have gone to those prisons. I have seen the conditions in those prisons in the United States. They are not ideal. The United States has no moral ground to be telling anyone how to run their prisons until they fix their own situation. So, yeah, come on. And government accountability. This is what Amnesty International is out there telling you all, right? And they seem like an NGO, a private entity. Amnesty International receives funding from governments and foundations across Europe and North America. And while it claims to be neutral, it has faced allegations of bias towards Western. It is biased. Forget about it has faced. It is biased towards Western foreign policy interests. Because this is what, when you get ChatGPT to help you with research, it comes with these lovely language, right? It has faced allegations. Forget about allegations. Amnesty International is biased towards Western foreign policy interests. Just like the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International has selective reporting and is being used as a tool to discredit African governments that resist Western control. For example, its reports on countries like Zimbabwe, and you remember what happened there so that it can report this, or Ethiopia often highlight abuses by governments resisting Western neoliberalism while ignoring issues in pro-Western nations, for example, Uganda. So how does this make us vulnerable? How does Amnesty International contribute to our vulnerability as Ubuntu Africa? Their reports can lead to negative international media coverage, sanctions, or diplomatic pressure on African countries, often aiding Western economic and geopolitical goals. Freedom House. Freedom House is a US-based NGO that promotes democracy and political freedom. It creates annual reports ranking countries based on their political and civil liberties with a heavy focus on free, partially free, or not free status. Again, they don't have the moral ground because we know very well within their own nation there are people who are not free or partially free. Freedom House is funded by the US government, straight up right there, US government, including through grants from the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, and the US State Department, making it a soft power tool of US foreign policy. Its reports and activities promote US foreign policy objectives. African countries that resist US influence, or align with rival powers like Russia, China, are often rated poorly on the Freedom House scale, while governments that align with US interests tend to receive favorable scores, not because they have freedom, but because they align with US interests. How does this make us vulnerable? Freedom House's reports are used to justify foreign aid allocation, sanctions, and interventions. In other words, that foreign aid they're telling you is the only way you can succeed. Freedom House, the reports that If you mess up, if you side with China or Russia, that your report is going to be low, and therefore you will not get foreign aid. But you will get sanctions on top of not getting foreign aid. It's just messed up. By downgrading the status of African countries that prioritize sovereignty over US alignment, they create pressure for political and economic concessions. So as much as we want to say, and rightfully so, that the blame is on African so-called leaders, and it is, a huge percentage is, again, their hands are tied. They can untie them and risk the consequences. They should untie them. Like John Perkins said, we have to be outraged and do whatever it takes. They should untie them and do whatever it takes to save their people. And some have, and they've lost their lives. And some have. Currently, we have Traore, and because he's aligning with people who can help him with defense and intelligence, they have countered 16 attempts on his life. US aid, this one right here, US aid. And the other day, I put out an article on my Medium, and I have shared it on my platforms, the different paid profiles where I am, Twitter, LinkedIn. You will see the article. I mentioned 1 Acre Fund as I was looking at another, but I was essentially covering GMO and these NGOs and what they're doing. But here goes this one, US aid. And John Perkins mentions US aid as one of the ways they funnel money, the economic hitmen, to the United States. Let's now stop even like talking about Europe and everyone. Let's now focus on the United States, because it is actually currently controlling everyone. USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. This is what, it's funny because when you read out the acronym, United States Agency for International Development, it seems innocent. But when you look at the acronym USAID, you will see it there. It is the aid of the US that they are in the business of. Funds many NGOs in Africa to promote development, health, and governance. While some US aid-funded projects aim to improve conditions, others have, and they're masters of this, right? They'll make sure that there's some good being done so that you don't criticize the bad, because they'll say, hey, look, we're doing good. And you Africans will be like, Others have been criticized for advancing US geopolitical interests by influencing policy and governance in African countries. 1 Acre Fund is the one I named. It has been popping up on my Instagram because I am someone who's returning to nurturing nature so that it can nurture me, to the earth, right? I want to grow my own food and all that. And so I'm very heavily focused on people who are doing that. And for some reason, these Wazungu think in their platforms, think that I want to be. I'm glad though, it came across my profile, because if not, I wouldn't know about it. 1 Acre Fund has been coming in. It seems like it's legit. It's helping African farmers. It is giving money, but they are tied with GMO organizations. So 1 Acre Fund provides small-scale farmers in Africa with financing, training, and supplies to increase their agricultural productivity. But they are funded by the USAID, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and various Western philanthropies. While 1 Acre Fund does provide practical support, some have raised concern. Well, it is aligned with Western agricultural models that prioritize market-driven farming. And this I know because I actually did the research on 1 Acre Fund, that they are actually aligned with Bayer. You will see them on Bayer's website. I put it in the article that I wrote. You can go read it. I have the links there of where I got the information. Models that prioritize market-driven farming and the promotion of genetically modified crops. So right there, immediately, you should just dismiss them. Send them packing. Immediately, don't even ask any questions. It doesn't matter how much good they're doing as long as they're doing this one big bad. And that's how we need to start analyzing. It doesn't matter how much good the US is doing as long as they're doing this one big bad that is keeping us in a very bad position. Doesn't matter. At least that is how I keep my sanity. Because when you all start to accommodate these criminals, I'm about to lose my sanity. How does this make us vulnerable, believing in 1 Acre Fund and the fact that they are letting us get 1 acre to help these women in Africa? By promoting a Western agricultural model, the 1 Acre Fund may encourage dependency on Western agricultural companies and products, reducing Africa's agricultural self-sufficiency and sovereignty. African Women's Development Fund, that's another one. AWDF, you're told, oh, lovely. They're here to help women, right? They come with their Wazungu women telling you how nice it's going to be to have rights and all that. And your husband is a horrible person. And you need to speak for yourself. Some truth, but come on. Let's look at the deeper interest in why they're there. It is a Pan-African foundation, Lord have mercy. Pan-African foundation that provides grants to support women rights organizations. By the way, everything that is Pan-African is not Pan-African. The CIA has co-opted Pan-African organizations all over the globe. The United States government, essentially. It is a Pan-African foundation, as we will see with one such organization, that provides grants to support women rights organizations and feminist movements across Africa. They receive significant funding from USAID and the Open Society Foundations. Open Society Foundations, George Soros. You remember we mentioned him. That's his foundation. While they work on women's rights, and their work on women's rights is important, they promote Western liberal ideologies that do not align with African culture and social norms. AWDF has also been accused, it focuses on issues that detract from Africa's broader struggles against neocolonialism and economic exploitation. So you're busy there believing their lies that take your vision, your focus from what you actually need to focus on, your resources that are leaving your continent daily. How does this make us vulnerable? The focus on gender issues, again, takes away your focus. The focus on gender issues often coincides with promoting Western values and may distract from the larger systemic struggles of African sovereignty and independence. Western funding often ties organizations to external agendas that align with US or European interests, so that you're busy worrying about LGBT fucking Q instead of your people who are being exploited. I'm not saying they don't have rights. I'm saying, please, let's sort out that when we are free. Let's not be distracted by focusing on that instead of getting the military bases out of our countries, the multinationals out of our countries, the US itself out of our countries, and get our sovereignty. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission, listen to how innocent it sounds. Kenyan Human Rights Commission, and you think it is the Kenyan Human Rights Commission. It is one of Kenya's leading human rights organizations focusing on civil liberties, political freedoms, and social justice. And I'm sure the youth who are on the street think that this is an organization that is for them. And it probably seems like it is. They receive funding from USAID, the UK's Department for International Development, DFID, and other Western donors. They promote Western agenda, especially during political unrest in Kenya. They're heavily reliant on foreign funding their heavy reliance on foreign funding raises concerns about the extent to which its agenda is influenced by its Western donors. So how does this make us in Kenya especially vulnerable? By advocating policies that align with Western governments and foreign investors, KHRC, the Kenyan Human Rights Commission, could be used to promote governance changes that favor Western economic policies. So they will be promoting leaders who the West wants. They'll be promoting Ruto. They'll be promoting Raila. So whoever, and actually, I'm actually going to follow them in all my platforms to see what they are posting. And I encourage you to follow all these entities on wherever you are, follow them so that you can see how they're moving, so that you start learning their language, so that you start learning about your enemy in order to fight your enemy. So the KHRC, because of its heavy reliance on Western donations, is undermining Kenya's ability to pursue a sovereign, independent path. Action Aid is another one. Let me see how many are left. The Clinton Foundation is another one, and its African partnerships, right? Action Aid, they get funding from Western governments, including the UK and Scandinavian countries, right? Those of you who thought Scandinavia was just a country over there minding its own business. No, as well as private donors. How does this make us vulnerable, Action Aid? By supporting development models that align with Western economic interests, Action Aid does contribute to the privatization of land and resources, leaving Africa more vulnerable to corporate exploitation, and reducing local control over natural resources. The Clinton Foundation, by the way, the Clintons are economic hitmen. Do not be fooled that he is a former president. And by the way, Obama is an economic hitman. The Clinton Foundation and its African partnerships. The Clinton Foundation has numerous initiatives across Africa, particularly focusing on health, education, and economic development. The health industry in the US is so messed up. Why the hell is a former president of the United States elsewhere but the United States to fix health? He should be very much invested in his own country, taking care of the health situation there because it's messed up. And I'm using a good word. I want to use another one, but I'm using messed up. The Clinton Foundation works on HIV/AIDS treatment through the Clinton Health Access Initiative in one of its flagship projects in Africa. They are heavily funded by Western governments, corporations, and wealthy donors. While it has done significant work in Africa, particularly in public health, it also aligns closely with US and Western foreign policy interests. The only reason they are doing what they are doing, the Clinton Foundation, is so that they can have access, so that they can push their interests. That is the only reason. So we are vulnerable in believing in them and their lies because while they are advancing privatization and foreign aid dependency, it perpetuates a cycle where African nations are reliant on Western entities for health and economic development, which reduces our capacity for self-reliance and sovereignty, which again is the reason why your leaders are all the time going back. They're always signing a document to get a new loan, instead of signing a document to give a local manufacturer some money so that they can build manufacturing and they can start producing goods and they can advance the value of the currency. The Gates Foundation, I am not going to leave this one behind. The Gates Foundation funds agricultural initiatives in Africa, particularly focusing on improving yields through technology and modern farming methods. It supports programs like the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. By the way, that Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa is a terrorist organization. Yes, I said it. And so is the Bill and Melinda Gates. All these are terrorist organizations. Why do I say that so flippantly? Like they're terrorist organizations? Because they're terrorizing our well-being. They're terrorizing African lives. By promoting US interests, they are terrorizing our well-being. They are terrorist organizations, trust me. Worse than the ones that you know, because at least the ones you know. You know where they are. You know how they look like. And they come fully dressed as they are. These ones come in suits, talking some nice talk while they're sucking your blood. So, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation programs are backed by Western donors and corporations, including major agribusinesses like Monsanto and Bayer. Bayer is now Monsanto. Bayer took over Monsanto. So that's who they're getting their funding from. So if your foundation is being sustained by Monsanto, why would you say anything against Monsanto? And so they promote genetically modified organisms and industrial agriculture, which benefits large agribusiness at the expense of African farmers. It pushes Western agricultural models that displace traditional sustainable African farming methods like permaculture, right? Like the way we used to dig tunnels to irrigate. So by promoting Western agricultural technology and GMOs, the Gates Foundation and its partners risk increasing African dependency on foreign corporations for seeds, fertilizers, and pesticides. That's just the small price. The big price is we consume these seeds and now we have disease all over and we're not living healthy lives. We're dependent on drugs to manage our day-to-day lives. So again, please awaken my people. Please realize who is out there that is literally not helping you. This lie that Africa can only move forward through aid is a big fat lie. And in fact, they're using that aid to carry out their government interests. So the key principles of communalism, I'm going for communalism, like I said, as the solution, is wealth redistribution. Wealth redistribution. And I don't know why you as an African would be worried about redistributing wealth. As long as I have my basic needs, I have food. I've been living a very simple life now that I have no income coming in, no revenue coming in. For me, I have food, I have shelter, I have a way from getting to point A to point B. I'm good. And I have clothes. I'm good. And my health is good. My kids are well. I'm good. That should be the basic. Not that, oh, I can post that I have a Range Rover. Oh, wait, I need to show you all my closet. Every now and then I'll post a video of me working out. Why? Because I want to inspire you that the thing that I am using to keep my mental sanity is working out. So if you, by chance, are going through some mental issues, try working out. You don't have to pay for an expensive, especially if you can't afford it, like I cannot, an expensive therapist. Try working out. That adrenaline, those endorphins help clear your mind. Being out in nature helps clear your mind. So I will post things like that. But posting a closet full of shoes, posting that you wore a wedding gown when you first walked into your wedding, and then you changed into outfit number 2, and then you changed into outfit number 3, and then you changed into outfit number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And yes, I have seen 8 outfits in one wedding, all of them $1,000 plus. And there's someone in Congo earning $2. We must change our mindsets. We must change the way, redistribute. Just those wedding dresses, by the way. Keep your one expensive wedding dress. Give us the 7. So the money that you use to buy the 7 wedding dresses, because you want to talk about, I'm not giving my money to poor people, right? They don't work hard. That money could be liquidated and sent somewhere to help someone. It probably could pay for several kids for school, a whole year of school in Africa. We have to change our mindset. We have to simplify our lifestyles. We really have to. Materialism must end. These luxurious things mean nothing as far as humanity and well-being and living a nice, sustainable lifestyle. Again, the US has all these things, right? Huge restaurants, $50, $70, $90 steaks. Like I'm literally sitting down to eat a plate that is $70, just the meat. Chauffeurs pull up in your big black cars. Someone opens the doors. Oh, you're walking in. I did Uber for a minute there when I was trying to make some money. Wasn't sustainable. I had a rich lady in the back of my car on the phone. I couldn't, as someone who's a walk-in, that was just, it took all of me to get through that ride. Frivolous conversation about nonsense. And I wanted so much to say to her, you are talking nonsense right now, woman. Get out of my car. These are the things that we have made life about, right? Oh, I'm gonna be in California next week at a party. Oh, I'm gonna be in China next week at a party. I'm coming back at it. No, we need to simplify our lives. So, nationalization of key industries is part of communalism. We saw that the lie of free market is a big fat lie. So Botswana nationalized its diamond industry. Those of you who are talking about Botswana's economy is doing well, you wonder why. They nationalized their diamond industry, and it has contributed significantly to national development. Community-based production systems, so self-reliance and sustainability in production, with a focus on local markets instead of export-driven economies. So let's grow that cotton on the continent. Let's process that cotton. Let's make the fabric. Let's use the fabric to make clothing. I'm proud of the source of knowledge. The source of knowledge is a US bookstore in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey. They just brought in a shipment of clothing from Ghana. Yes, promote those people in Ghana. Yes, help them grow their industry. And you're bringing a shipment every year or twice a year. Those people know they have, we need to be. So this is how the people in Ghana, where the source of knowledge goes to get their goods and products to sell here in the US to the African community in the US. This is what they know. They know the next time the source of knowledge is coming. They know that they're going to be kept updated by the source of knowledge, whether the items that they got this time around have been bought. And they know that they need to start producing for the next shipment. That creates, it builds the economy in that area. And the beauty of it is that their goods and products are going to Black community here. That's the even extra beauty of it. We have to start thinking this way. So, policy recommendation for African leaders. Nationalization of resources. Reclaim control over natural resources by nationalizing key industries such as oil and mining. Nationalize. Stop with the Adani deal. Send Mr. Adani, I saw him in Tanzania, to these snakes are everywhere. They have no shame. Send him home to India. Let him go continue maintaining the airport in India. I used to travel to India as a child. My father used to work for Kenya Airways, and we would go there. Went to Bombay. The airport is not that nice in Bombay. Maybe it has changed now. Let him go to Mumbai and fix that airport. Botswana's success in diamond revenue, we just mentioned that. Intra-African trade, the AfCFTA, again, the African Continental Free Trade Area, but there are conditions to that. It must be under sovereignty. It must be in a state where we are sovereign nations calling the shots, not the way it is currently. The African Continental Free Trade Area, as we saw last week, does not serve us today because we are not in control. So strengthen regional trade through African Continental, through whichever regional trade blocks that we're going to create that are independent of Western influence. So the potential is that it can boost trade in agriculture and manufacturing between African nations. Progressive taxation for wealth redistribution. We're not saying do not tax. We're saying when you tax, make sure you're using it towards developing us, not paying IMF. Our taxation, right? Kenyans were talking the other day in a space talking about Kenyans pay taxes, the government have money. The government don't have money because your taxes are going to paying IMF. IMF, every time the government collects your taxes, IMF is at the door. In fact, maybe even they have a wiring system where it directly goes to the US. It doesn't even stop in Kenya, your taxes. I would not be surprised. And I actually, I was on the phone with someone from Kenya who was telling me that it was revealed that one of the systems that they thought was for funding within Kenya is actually going externally. I forget the name. And I invite you, and I don't want to say your name, who you are. I invite you to join us and mention this on Monday when we are in the Twitter space. Because that is a very good example of the fact that probably the wiring of your taxes is going straight to US entities. Again, we must wake up. All right, so the group discussion is going to be on Monday. We ask you to join us at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is the New York area time, because I'm located there right now. So this is the time I ground myself on right now. But for Kenya, that is 7 hours ahead. For GMT, that is 4 hours ahead. For South Africa, South African nations, that is 6 hours ahead. So add to that 7 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, wherever you are, and figure out the time there. We will discuss what we talked about today, and we will find solutions together. And those of us who can implement will implement. For example, Bungi Ubuntu is working with the Imagine Al-Keblan and whatever other organization, and we invite all organizations to join us to help. Number one, our first project is build a seed bank in Nigeria. So I thank you all. I'm gonna look at the chat. India emerges third most powerful country, potential superpower, Lowy Institute, Australia. Okay, yeah. Yeah, they are attacking our food self-sufficiency. Yeah, NGOs do not help us. So I welcome you all to join us on Monday. I thank you all. Yes, we needed to go the extra 38 minutes or so today. Siku njema, kila laheri, kwaherini.